I had always prided myself on being the calm one in the family, the one who never overreacted, who kept her emotions hidden behind a well-maintained smile. But there are moments in life when even the most composed person is tested, when the calm facade cracks and you're left exposed, feeling the weight of the truth. It started innocently enough, a weekend gathering at my son's house. The usual affair: my daughter-in-law, Laura, bustling around, my grandchildren playing in the corner, and Carl, my son, trying to hide his frustration behind his coffee mug. But something was off that day. Maybe it was the way Carl's face tightened when he looked at me, or the way Laura avoided eye contact all morning. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but there was a tension in the air, an undercurrent that I couldn't ignore. After lunch, while the children played outside, I decided to take a quiet walk in the garden. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. I was lost in my thoughts when I heard the distinct sound of a suitcase hitting the ground. It was a heavy thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of fabric scraping against the grass. Turning slowly, I saw Laura standing near the edge of the lake, her back to me. In one swift motion, she threw the suitcase into the water with a force that seemed to echo in the quiet of the afternoon. The splash it created was surprisingly loud, as if the water itself was protesting the intrusion. I froze, my heart racing. Why had she thrown it? What was inside? I wanted to call out to her, ask her what she was doing, but my words caught in my throat. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching the ripples slowly fade around the suitcase as it sank deeper into the murky water. Laura turned to leave, unaware that I had seen everything. For a moment, I considered letting it go. Maybe it was nothing, just an accident. Maybe it didn't matter, but deep down I knew it did. The way she had thrown it, so deliberate, so uncaring, something about it felt wrong. I walked over to the edge of the lake, staring at the spot where the suitcase had disappeared. My mind raced with possibilities. What could possibly be in there that made her act like that? Was it something I wasn't supposed to know? My pulse quickened as I made the decision. I wasn't going to let it go. I was going to find out what was inside that suitcase, no matter what it took. But first, I needed to gather my thoughts, make a plan. I couldn't just dive into this blindly. I had to be careful, even though every instinct in me screamed to rush in to uncover the truth. The truth had always been important to me, but now it felt like something I might not be ready for. I left the garden and went inside, trying to act normal as though nothing had happened. But deep down, I knew that the moment I had witnessed would change everything. I barely slept that night. The image of Laura throwing the suitcase into the lake haunted me, replaying over and over in my mind like a broken record. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. I needed answers, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much was at stake. If I was going to investigate this, I had to be careful. I didn't want to push my son or daughter-in-law too far, but I knew I had no choice. The next morning, as Carl left for work, I made my way to the lake. The spot where Laura had thrown the suitcase was still fresh in my memory, a few yards from the water's edge. I knew it would be difficult, but I had to try. The suitcase had to be retrieved. It had to be now, before someone else noticed it was gone. I grabbed an old fishing net from the shed, one I hadn't used in years, and made my way to the water. The lake looked deceptively peaceful in the morning light, its surface reflecting the blue sky like a mirror. But underneath that calm, I knew something was waiting. I wasn't sure what, but I couldn't walk away without trying. The fishing net barely reached the spot I had in mind, but after a few attempts, it caught something solid. My heart skipped a beat as I pulled with all my strength, praying the net would hold. Slowly but surely, the suitcase began to surface. It was heavy, soaked, and stained with dirt, but there it was, proof that Laura had tried to hide something. I dragged the suitcase onto the shore and carefully unhooked the net. As I stared at it, the weight of the situation hit me. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew whatever was inside would be a game changer. With trembling hands, I undid the zipper. The inside was a tangled mess: clothes, papers, and something that looked like a photograph. I pulled the photograph out first. It was an old, faded picture of Carl and Laura taken at a family gathering years ago, but there was something odd about the photo. Something in the background caught my eye. It was a face I didn't recognize, someone standing just behind them, almost hidden in the shadows. The figure had a strange, unreadable expression on their face, and for some reason the sight of them sent a chill down my spine. I quickly pushed the photo aside and continued digging. The next item I pulled out was a small, sealed envelope. My name was written on the front in Laura's handwriting. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at it. What on earth could she have wanted to say to me? Why keep it hidden? I opened the envelope with care, and inside I found a letter. As I read the first few lines, I felt my heart sink. The words were chilling. "I never meant for you to find out like this, but I can't keep the secret anymore. I don't know who else to turn to, and I'm terrified of the consequences, but you have to know the truth." I stopped reading right there. The weight of the words hung in the air, suffocating me. What secret was Laura hiding? What was so important that she had to hide it in a suitcase, throw it in the lake, and write me this letter? As the morning sun began to climb higher in the sky, I knew one thing for certain: this was just the beginning. Whatever Laura had been hiding was far more complicated than I had ever imagined. But now I had the letter, now I had the truth, and I was going to find out everything. I couldn't sit still. My hands shook as I held the letter, trying to process what I had just read. The air around me felt heavy, thick with secrets that had been buried for far too long. I had no idea where this path would lead, but I couldn't turn back now. I walked back to the house with the suitcase in tow, carefully tucking the letter into my pocket. The day had barely begun, but the weight of the situation felt like a lifetime of unanswered questions. The picture of Carl and Laura, with the mysterious figure lurking behind them, seemed to haunt me with every step I took. Who was that person? What did they have to do with Laura's secret? As I stepped inside, I found myself standing in the hallway, staring at the empty living room. Carl wouldn't be home for hours, and Laura, well, I wasn't sure where she was, but I knew I couldn't wait any longer to confront her. I grabbed a pair of rubber gloves and opened the suitcase again. The contents were even stranger now in the harsh light of day. Clothes and personal items littered the case, but there were also small, inconspicuous items that made my heart race. Some kind of small box wrapped in a faded red cloth, and a strange key, old-fashioned and ornate. What did they all mean? Why were they hidden in a suitcase, discarded into the lake, left behind for someone else to find? I carefully unwrapped the small box. It was wooden, weathered with age, and had a faint, intricate design carved into its surface. As I opened it, a thick, musty smell filled the air. Inside the box was a bundle of letters, yellowed and fragile. My mind raced. Whose letters were these, and why were they so carefully tucked away? I picked up the first letter and unfolded it. The handwriting was elegant but unfamiliar, nothing like Laura's. It was dated from over 30 years ago. As I read the first few lines, a shockwave of realization hit me. The letter was addressed to someone named Thomas, and the words inside were filled with love, longing, and desperation. Whoever Thomas was, he had a deep connection to Laura, one I had never known about. "My dearest Thomas, every moment without you feels like a lifetime. I can't live in this silence anymore. We have to be together no matter the cost." My mind raced. Could this Thomas be the mysterious figure in the photograph? I quickly skimmed through the rest of the letters, each one filled with the same sense of urgency and passion. I needed answers, but the more I read, the more questions I had. I sat back, clutching the letters in my hand. It was clear now that Laura's past had been far more complicated than I could ever have imagined. There was someone she had loved, someone she had kept hidden from the rest of the world. But why had she never spoken about him, and why had she kept these letters so well hidden? My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. It was Laura. She stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with shock when she saw the suitcase, the letters, the key in my hands. Her expression quickly shifted to something darker, something that told me this confrontation was inevitable. I took a deep breath. "Laura," I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion, "I found your letters, and I know about Thomas." She froze, her hand still on the doorknob. The silence stretched between us, thick with tension. "What do you think you know?" she asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. I stared at her, the weight of the truth hanging in the air like a storm ready to break. "I think I know enough to realize that you've been hiding something from us for a very long time." Laura's face twisted with emotions I couldn't read: fear, guilt, anger. But more than anything, there was something I hadn't expected: regret. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in years, I saw her as a person, not just the wife of my son, not just the woman I had tried so hard to understand. I saw her as someone who had been carrying a burden, a secret too heavy to bear alone. She stepped forward slowly, the tension in her movements telling me she was on the verge of saying something she had been keeping locked away for far too long. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said quietly, her voice trembling just enough to betray her composure. She looked down at the suitcase, then back up at me as if trying to gauge how much I really understood. "Then tell me," I urged, "tell me everything. The letters, the man in the picture, who is he?" She hesitated for a long moment, her lips pressed tightly together as though the words were stuck, unwilling to come out. I took a step closer, careful not to invade her space but making it clear that I wasn't going anywhere until she spoke. His name is Thomas, she finally said, her voice a mixture of pain and nostalgia. I loved him once, a long time ago, before I met Carl. He was everything I thought I wanted. He was passionate, exciting, free, but our lives didn't align. It wasn't sustainable. I nodded, understanding the words but still not grasping the depth of her confession. Then why keep it a secret? I asked, my voice steady but betraying the confusion I felt. Why hide it from Carl, from all of us? Laura's eyes flickered with something akin to shame. I thought I had put it behind me. I married Carl, I had a family, and I convinced myself that I was doing the right thing. But she paused, her voice catching in her throat. But Thomas never really left. He's always been there in the background. And when Carl and I started to drift, when things between us started falling apart, I started seeing him again. The words hit me like a punch in the stomach. You've been seeing him behind Carl's back. Laura's gaze dropped to the floor. Not exactly. At first it was just messages, letters, but then he came back into my life and I couldn't say no. I was lonely and he made me feel alive again, but it wasn't just about him. I was lost and I didn't know how to be found. I felt the weight of her confession press against me, every word weighing heavily on the truth I'd been avoiding. Laura wasn't just an accomplice in some secret affair. She was a woman torn between the past and the present, struggling with her own identity, her own desires in a life she had built under false pretenses. Why the suitcase, the letters, the key? I asked, still holding the box of letters in my hand as though the answers would come from them. She looked up, her face pale. The suitcase was meant to be the final step. I thought if I could leave everything behind, my past, my regrets, the lies, I could finally move on. But every time I tried to throw it away, I couldn't. I didn't want to face the truth, and I certainly didn't want Carl to find out. But you've been hiding this from Carl for how long? I asked, unable to keep the disbelief from my voice. Years, she said softly. I thought it was over. But when you're married, when you're living in a house that feels more like a cage than a home, the past always finds its way back. And it did, in the form of Thomas. I looked down at the suitcase, at the faded letters, at the key that seemed to symbolize the door she had closed so tightly, only for it to creak open in the most unexpected way. And Carl? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I don't know how to tell him, Laura admitted, her voice filled with the sorrow of a truth too painful to bear. I can't undo what's been done. I've lied to him, to myself, and now I don't know how to fix it. The room felt colder now, the weight of her confession sinking in like the stillness of a storm before it breaks. But something in me shifted. This wasn't just about betrayal. This was about a woman who had lost herself in the pursuit of everything she thought she was supposed to have. And maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to reclaim what was hers if she was willing to face the consequences. Laura, I said quietly, my voice softer now, the truth is the only way to heal, but you have to decide if you're ready to face it. Carl deserves that. She nodded, but her face remained conflicted, torn between the love she had for her family and the haunting shadow of a past she could no longer run from. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken words, unasked questions. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew that this was the beginning of something far bigger than any of us had anticipated. The next few days passed in a blur. Laura seemed distant, lost in her thoughts, unable to make a decision. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and uncomfortable. Carl had been more withdrawn than usual, his usual jovial self now replaced with a quiet sadness. I knew something was off, but I didn't have the heart to confront him yet. It wasn't my place. But Laura had to decide. The longer she stayed silent, the harder it would be to move forward. She couldn't live in the past and present simultaneously. Eventually, the truth would spill out one way or another, and when it did, everything would change. I found myself sitting in the living room one afternoon, staring out the window when I saw Carl pull into the driveway. The car's engine cut off with a sharp click. I could tell by the way he got out of the car that something was different. His shoulders were slumped, and his face, he never looked that way unless something was wrong. I watched as he walked toward the door. He didn't knock, he just walked right in like he was expected. "Mom," he said, his voice strained as he stepped inside. I didn't look up immediately. "Carl," I said, keeping my voice steady, "what's going on?" He walked to the couch, sitting down beside me, his gaze downcast. "I know something's wrong, I can feel it. I've been feeling it for a while now." I could feel his pain, his confusion. He was so used to hiding the truth from himself. He had no idea that the woman he loved, the woman he had trusted more than anyone, was hiding a secret that could break them. "Carl," I said slowly, "you need to talk to Laura. It's time for the truth." The words felt heavy in the air. He looked at me, his brows furrowed. I don't understand. What truth? I took a deep breath. I can't give you all the answers, but Laura's been keeping something from you, and it's been eating at her. He recoiled as though the words had hit him in the chest. What are you talking about? What could she have kept from me? Carl, you need to confront her. This isn't something you can avoid. He stood abruptly, his face twisting with frustration. I don't want to confront her. I don't want to hear it, but I know something's wrong. He ran a hand through his hair, packing in small circles. I don't want to lose her, Mom. I love her. I stood up and faced him. Then you need to be strong enough to hear the truth, even if it hurts. And you need to listen to her, Carl. She's been fighting this alone. Carl's eyes widened. What is she hiding from me? What's so bad that she's been keeping it from me for years? I hesitated. I couldn't say more than what I already had. You'll have to ask her. But I can tell you this much, the truth won't hurt you more than living in the lie. He stood still for a moment, digesting my words. The tension in his shoulders eased, but his expression was still one of confusion. Okay, I'll talk to her, but I don't know what to expect. I nodded. None of us do, but it's time. The conversation was inevitable. It was only a matter of when Laura would come face to face with the damage her silence had caused. The weight of her actions, hidden for so long, now had to be carried by both of them. Later that evening, Carl came back to the house. I could tell by the look in his eyes that he had finally done what I'd asked him to do. He had confronted Laura. The house was quieter than it had been all week. The door shut softly behind Carl and he moved toward the kitchen where I was preparing dinner. I turned to face him, noticing the change in his demeanor. He seemed lighter, less burdened. It's done, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Did you talk? I asked gently, my heart beating a little faster. He nodded, the weight of everything they'd said hanging in the air between us. I don't know if I can forgive her yet, but I understand now. I understand what she's been going through, what we've both been going through. It's not just about her, it's about me too. I've been blind. He paused, his eyes locked on mine. I'm not sure what's next, but I'm ready to start fresh. I want to build something real. We both do. I didn't know if that meant they would stay together or if they would finally part ways, but for the first time in weeks, I saw hope in Carl's eyes. He wasn't running anymore. He was ready to face what needed to be faced. Well, I said, trying to hold back my own emotions, the truth has a way of changing everything, but now you can decide what comes next. You both can. Carl sat down at the kitchen table, his gaze still distant. I don't know what will happen with us, but I'm not afraid anymore. Later that night, I received a message from Laura. She wanted to talk. She wanted to apologize for everything, the years of silence, the secrets, the guilt. But she also wanted something more, a chance to rebuild, to fix what was broken. I wasn't sure where this story would end, but I knew it was the beginning of something new, something painful but necessary. The night was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the house settling. I sat in my favorite armchair, my hands folded in my lap, waiting for Laura to arrive. The invitation I had extended earlier that day still hung in the air. It was her turn to speak, and I was ready to listen. She arrived, looking smaller than I remembered. Her posture was stiff, as though she were carrying the weight of everything she had been hiding for so long. She hadn't changed much in appearance, but the way she walked through the door, hesitating before crossing the threshold, told me everything I needed to know about how much pain she was in. Mom, she said softly, her voice almost a whisper, I'm so sorry for everything. I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. Her apology, though long overdue, still felt like a puzzle piece falling into place. She had been so full of excuses for so long, so quick to defend herself against the accusations I had never made. Now, for the first time, she was offering something real, a true apology. She sat down across from me, her hands trembling slightly as she folded them together on the table. I've spent so many years pretending that I had everything figured out, she said, her voice thick with regret. But the truth is, I've been hiding from my own mistakes. I've ignored what was happening around me, and I've hurt you. I've hurt Carl. I've hurt our family. I didn't interrupt. I let her speak, her words flowing with a raw honesty that I hadn't expected from her. Laura had always been the type to mask her emotions, to keep everything tucked away behind a smile. Now I was seeing a side of her that had been buried beneath layers of pride and shame. I thought I could fix everything on my own, she continued, her voice faltering slightly. But I've realized that the only thing I've been doing is running. Running from the truth, running from my own responsibility, and running from you. I didn't know how to face it. I didn't know how to face you. I could see the tears welling up in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she wiped them away quickly, as if ashamed of showing any vulnerability. "Laura," I said, my voice steady but kind, "I know it's been hard, I've seen it. I've lived through it with you, but hiding from the truth never makes it go away, it just makes it harder to fix." She nodded, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I know that now, I do, and I know I can't take back what I've done, but I can start over. We both can. I don't want to keep running anymore. I want to be part of the family again. I want to be present, and I want to make things right with Carl." The sincerity in her voice hit me like a wave. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, not immediately. She wasn't asking me to erase everything she'd done. She was simply asking for a chance to be better, a chance to heal. I took a deep breath. The weight of the past was heavy, but there was something lighter in the air now. Something had shifted between us. The tension, the distance was slowly dissolving. "I can't promise everything will be the same," I said carefully, "but I'm willing to try. We can't undo what's been done, but we can rebuild, together, if you're really ready for that." Laura's shoulders sagged with relief, as though a burden had been lifted. She nodded, her lips trembling as she whispered, "I'm ready." We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the conversation settling between us. I could feel the years of resentment, of pain, slowly fading into the background. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step forward, a step toward healing. Later that night, I sat in the living room, staring at the empty chair where Carl usually sat. He had stayed out of the conversation, not wanting to push Laura further, but I knew that the change wouldn't just come from her, it would come from both of them. Carl had been through so much, too. He was the one who had stayed silent, the one who had absorbed all of Laura's mistakes without ever voicing his own hurt. I knew it wasn't just about Laura's apology. It was about Carl finding his own peace with what had happened and learning to forgive himself, too. The next day, Carl called. His voice was calm but firm, and I could tell he had been doing a lot of thinking. "I talked to Laura," he said, "and I think I understand now. I understand what she's been going through, and I think I can forgive her, but more than that, I think I need to forgive myself." I felt a lump form in my throat. Carl had always been the protector, the one who kept everything together. But in doing so, he had neglected his own needs, his own voice. He had let the silence fill the gaps between him and Laura, between him and me, and now, for the first time, I could hear the strength in his voice. The man who had been hiding for so long was finally coming out of the shadows. "I'm proud of you, Carl," I said quietly, "for seeing the truth, for facing it, and for choosing to heal." He didn't respond right away, but I could hear the weight in his breath, the unspoken gratitude in his silence. We both knew this was just the beginning, but for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful for them, for us, for the family we still had a chance to save. The days that followed were quieter than I had expected, but in the best way possible. It was as though a new chapter was beginning, not with a loud bang or an immediate resolution, but with small, steady steps. Carl and Laura had started talking more openly, no longer shying away from the things they had buried for so long. They weren't perfect, and they weren't expecting to be, but what I saw in them was something I hadn't seen in years' effort. Real, unguarded effort to change, to be better, to truly understand one another. It was humbling, seeing them so vulnerable. It reminded me that we were all in some way still learning how to love and how to be loved. Laura had come by a few times, bringing flowers from her garden and making small talk as if we hadn't spent years in silence. It wasn't easy, but it was real. She'd even apologized for the way she had treated Carl, saying she was ready to step up and be the wife he deserved. It wasn't grand or dramatic, it was simple and sincere. Carl, on the other hand, had begun to let go of some of his anger. For the first time, I saw him laughing without that defensive edge to it. He and Laura spent more time together, playing cards on the porch, taking walks in the evenings. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Real, human progress. The kind that takes time but is worth every minute. As the weeks went by, I began to feel a change in myself as well. I had spent so much of my life waiting for others to see me, to recognize me, to apologize for all the hurt they had caused. But now I understood something vital. I couldn't wait for them. I had to see myself first. I had to value myself first. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I questioned whether I had made the right choices. But then I would look around at my life, at the people who had chosen to be part of it, and I would remember that I was finally living for me. That, in itself, was a victory. One evening after dinner, I sat with Carl on the porch, the air warm and thick with the scent of blooming flowers. It was peaceful, a quiet kind of peace that I hadn't known in years. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for a phone call, a message, or an apology. I was simply existing in the moment, grateful for the peace I had fought so hard to find. Carl looked at me, his face softer than it had been in ages. "Mom," he said quietly, "I don't know how to say this, but I feel like we've finally come out of something dark. We've been in the shadows for so long, but now it's different. I don't know how to thank you for being here, for staying through all of it." I didn't answer right away. What was there to say? The words felt insufficient, but I understood. The road to healing wasn't linear. There were still bumps, still challenges. But for the first time in years, we were moving forward together as a family. "You don't have to thank me," I replied. "I stayed because I believe in this family, and I believe in you." The next few weeks were filled with small moments that I hadn't expected. Carl and Laura started attending family therapy, both of them determined to work through the pain they had caused each other. It wasn't easy for either of them, but they did it together. And I started to finally let go of the anger and resentment that I had been holding onto for so long. I realized that holding onto it only gave the past power over me. It didn't make me stronger, it just kept me stuck. So I decided to let it go. But there was one last thing that I had to face, something I had avoided for too long: my relationship with Ruby. She had been a constant presence in my life, but we hadn't been as close as we once were. I knew that I had to make things right with her. No more excuses, no more pretending. I needed to be there for her, to be the grandmother she deserved. One day, after Ruby had come home from school, I asked her to come over for tea. She had been avoiding me for a while, but I could see in her eyes that she still needed me. She needed someone to show her that she wasn't invisible, she wasn't forgotten. When she walked through the door, I could see the hesitation in her step. She was older now, and the innocence she once had was gone, but she was still my Ruby, the little girl who used to sit on my lap and tell me all about her day. The little girl who used to look at me with such wonder, as if I had all the answers. We sat at the kitchen table and I poured her a cup of tea. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. "Ruby," I began, my voice steady but gentle, "I know we've had our differences, but I want you to know that I love you, and I always will, no matter what has happened in the past." She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me, her eyes wide, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then, finally, she spoke. "I missed you, Grandma. I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. I didn't know how to fix it." I smiled softly and took her hand. "You don't have to fix anything. We're family, and we're always going to be family no matter what." In the weeks that followed, something shifted between Ruby and me. It wasn't instant, nor was it dramatic, but it was steady. The space between us that had grown over the years, filled with silence and misunderstanding, slowly began to close. We started spending more time together, quiet afternoons, sitting on the porch, baking cookies, and even watching old movies. It wasn't the grand gestures that mattered, but the quiet, everyday moments that allowed us to rebuild our connection. Ruby was still trying to find her place in the world, struggling with the expectations placed on her and the pressure to fit in with her family. She was trying to understand her role in our family dynamic, but it wasn't easy. I could see the confusion in her eyes, the self-doubt creeping in when she thought no one was watching. But I knew better. I knew that in order for her to heal, she needed space, not just from me, but from the constant weight of everyone's expectations. So I started teaching her, not with words, but with actions. The way I had begun to live my life with more intention, more authenticity, I showed her by example. We began taking small steps together. I'd see her getting frustrated with herself, and instead of offering advice, I'd simply ask, "What do you think? What do you need?" I wanted her to find her own voice, to stop seeking validation from others, especially from me. Slowly, she started opening up again, like a flower starting to bloom in the spring. One afternoon, as we sat in the kitchen together, she spoke more freely. She told me about school, about the new friends she was making, and about the pressure she felt to be perfect. I could see her fighting to fit in, trying to live up to an ideal she didn't even believe in. "Grandma," she said, hesitating, "I'm not sure if I'll ever be like everyone else. Like I can't be perfect like Mom wants me to be, or Dad, or anyone." I set down the rolling pin I'd been using and looked at her. She looked so much like me when I was her age, uncertain, questioning, and yet strong beneath it all. "Ruby," I said softly, "you don't have to be like anyone else, not even me. You're already perfect just as you are. You don't need to prove anything to anyone, especially not to them. You just need to live your life as yourself, not as someone they want you to be." She nodded, the weight in her eyes slowly lifting. For the first time in a long time, I saw a glimmer of peace in her expression. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Meanwhile, Carl and Laura were still working on their own relationship, but the cracks in their marriage were slowly starting to heal. They spent evenings talking openly about their frustrations, their fears, and their dreams for the future. There were still times when the walls would come up between them, but they were learning, slowly but surely, how to communicate with honesty and vulnerability. I never asked about their progress directly. I didn't need to know all the details. What mattered was that they were trying. They were taking those difficult first steps toward healing, and I could see the love between them starting to bloom again like a flower growing despite the cold. Carl, in particular, seemed to be changing. He was no longer the distant son who would only call when he needed something. He started checking in more, offering help without waiting to be asked. One evening after dinner, Carl sat down beside me on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. The air was still, peaceful. "Mom," he began quietly, "I know I've messed up. I know I've hurt you more than I should have. And I don't know if you'll ever forgive me for it, but I need you to know that I'm trying. I'm trying to be a better person, a better son. I don't want to keep making the same mistakes." I didn't say anything at first. I just let the silence sit there between us. There were so many things I could have said, so many hurtful things I could have reminded him of, but instead I just placed my hand over his. "You don't need to apologize anymore," I said softly. "You're doing better, and that's all I can ask for. Just keep trying for yourself, for your family." And he did. For the first time in years, I could see Carl trying not to repeat the same patterns, and that was enough for me. It was progress. As the days passed, I found myself spending more time with my old friends, too. They were all busy with their own lives, but they made time for me just like I made time for them. We sat together, reminiscing about the old days, laughing over shared memories, and comforting each other when the weight of life felt too much to bear. One afternoon, when Marcia and Nora came by for tea, I realized how much I had missed these quiet moments with them. We didn't have to do anything grand. We didn't need fancy outings or plans. All we needed was each other. "I'm glad you're here," I told them, my voice full of gratitude. "You're the ones who helped me find my way when I was lost. You're the ones who have always made me feel like I matter." They smiled, and we spent the rest of the afternoon simply enjoying each other's company. There was no need for anything else. This was enough. But despite all the progress, I knew that healing wasn't a straight line. There would be setbacks, moments when I questioned everything. But those moments became fewer and fewer. I was beginning to find peace, real peace, and that was worth more than anything else. Carl, Laura, Ruby, and I were learning how to live alongside one another without trying to change one another. We were accepting our flaws and mistakes. We were healing, slowly but surely. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to happen. I felt like I was already living the life I had fought so hard to rebuild. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was enough. As the months passed, the changes in our family began to solidify. It wasn't always easy, and there were still moments of tension, but they were fewer and they didn't have the same weight. We were finally beginning to understand each other again, to forgive without expectations of anything being returned. We were finding our new normal, one that didn't require perfection or constant validation. Carl and I had more honest conversations, and for the first time, he actually listened to what I was saying without shutting down. He would ask me about my life, my plans, my feelings in a way that showed genuine curiosity. It felt strange at first, like we were learning to communicate from scratch, but it also felt incredibly healing. Ruby, too, was changing. She was still figuring out who she was, but I could see the strength she was beginning to find within herself. She wasn't the same girl who had once only tried to meet the expectations of others. She was starting to speak up for herself more, standing firm in her own opinions and making choices that felt right for her, not for anyone else. It was small, gradual growth, but it was enough. One evening, after dinner, Ruby came to sit with me on the porch. The air was still warm and the last light of the day lingered in the sky. I had just finished some paperwork, but when Ruby sat down next to me, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't had in a long time. "Grandma," she started, hesitating for a moment, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said about choosing yourself." She looked at me, her eyes full of sincerity. "I think I'm starting to understand what you meant. I've been so focused on trying to be perfect, to be what everyone else wants me to be. But I don't think I need to be like that anymore. I'm not perfect, and that's okay." I smiled, my heart swelling with pride. "You're right, you don't need to be perfect, just be yourself, that's more than enough." She nodded, looking out into the distance. "I've also been thinking about Dad, about how we've both kind of been stuck in this cycle where he wants things to be one way and I don't fit into that. But I want to try and understand him better like you did. Maybe if I start doing that, things will change between us." I placed a hand on hers, squeezing it gently. That's a good idea, Ruby, but remember, it's not just about understanding him, it's about understanding yourself too. Don't lose who you are in the process. She smiled, her eyes brighter than they had been in a while. I won't forget that, thanks, Grandma. Meanwhile, Carl and Laura were also making strides. They weren't perfect, far from it, but they were learning to communicate better, to listen to each other with more empathy. Carl had started attending therapy, something I never thought I'd see him do, and it made a world of difference. He was beginning to confront his own issues, the ones that had always been easier to ignore or blame on others. Laura, too, was opening up more, sharing her frustrations without fear of judgment. It wasn't always smooth sailing, but they were trying. And for once, I wasn't the one carrying the burden of holding the family together. We were all doing our part. One afternoon, I decided to visit Lena, the attorney who had helped me with the legal matters regarding the house and the trust. I hadn't seen her in months, but I still kept in touch, sharing updates about how things were going in my life. When I walked into her office, I was greeted with the same warm smile and the comforting scent of fresh coffee. "Mabel, it's good to see you again," Lena said, offering me a seat. "How have you been? How's everything with the family?" I sat down, the weight of everything we had been through still fresh but lighter now. "It's been a journey, Lena. I won't lie, it hasn't been easy, but we're all finding our way slowly but surely." Lena nodded, her expression understanding. "I'm glad to hear that. It sounds like you've made some real progress, and you sound, I don't know, more at peace with everything." I smiled. "I am. It's not perfect, but I've stopped waiting for perfection. I've stopped waiting for someone else to fix things. I'm fixing them myself." She looked at me with pride. "That's the most important step, Mabel. You've found your power again." As time went on, I began to focus more on the things I had once neglected. I started writing again, journals, stories, letters I would never send. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone anymore. The only person I had to answer to was myself. I also made a point to travel more. There were places I'd always wanted to see, but I had put them off for years, telling myself that I wasn't young enough, that it was too late. But I was done with those excuses. I began planning small trips, going to places I had dreamed of visiting, not waiting for permission from anyone but myself. One of my first trips was to the coast, a quiet little town by the ocean where I could walk along the beach, breathe in the salty air, and listen to the sound of the waves crashing against the shore. It was a place I had always wanted to visit but had never felt allowed to, as if there was always something more important to do. But not anymore. Now I went because I deserved it. I returned from my trip refreshed with a new sense of freedom. I realized that I had been living in the shadows of others for far too long, afraid to step into the light. But now I was finally letting myself be seen, and it felt good. One evening, as I sat in my favorite chair by the window watching the sun dip below the horizon, I thought about everything I had been through. The mistakes, the heartache, the silence, but also the healing, the growth, the joy. I had finally learned the most important lesson of all, that I am enough just as I am. The more I lived, the more I realized how much of my life had been spent waiting for others. I had waited for approval, for invitations, for apologies, for recognition. I had waited for years to be seen by the people I loved, and in doing so, I had neglected the most important person in my life, myself. But now, that waiting had ended. I was no longer apologizing for my presence, nor was I shrinking into the background of someone else's story. I had stepped into my own light, and it felt like freedom. It was a Sunday afternoon when Carl called. It had been a few weeks since we last spoke. I had been so focused on myself, on my new life, that I had allowed the distance to grow between us. But as I listened to the phone ring, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid of what he might say or of the conversation that would follow. I simply let it ring, waited for the beep, and then pressed accept. "Mom," his voice was tentative, unsure. "Hey, Carl," I replied, my voice steady. "How are you?" There was a long pause. "I've been thinking about what you said," he finally admitted, "about how you've always been there for us, but we never really saw you." I didn't respond right away, letting the words hang in the air. I wanted to tell him how deeply those words affected me, how much it meant to hear them, but I also wanted him to process this for himself. He cleared his throat. "I've been going to therapy, Mom. It's hard, but I'm trying. I want to be better for you, for me, for Ruby." Tears threatened to well up in my eyes, but I held them back. This wasn't the time to cry. This was the time to listen, to accept. "I'm proud of you, Carl. It's not easy, but it's the right thing to do. It's what you've needed to do for a long time. I'm glad you're doing it, even if it's hard." There was another long silence. And then, in a soft voice, Carl said, "Mom, I'm sorry for everything, for not seeing you, for taking you for granted. I don't know what else to say. I just want you to know that I'm trying." And for the first time in my life, I truly believed him. It wasn't about the grand gestures or the promises of change, it was about the sincerity behind his words. He was finally seeing me, not as his mother, his caretaker, or his background character. He was seeing me as I was someone who had lived her own life, who had dreams and regrets, someone who deserved respect. "I know you are," I said softly, "and I'm proud of you for trying. But Carl, I need you to know something. I'm not the person I was. I'm not waiting for you to fix things anymore. I'm living my life and I'm doing it on my terms. And if you want to be part of that, if you want to be part of my world, you have to meet me where I am." He was quiet for a moment and then he whispered, "I will, I promise. I just want to be better for you." "I know you do," I replied. "Just keep working on yourself. That's all I ask." A week later, Carl invited me to dinner. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple meal with him and Ruby. I hesitated at first, unsure of what to expect, but something told me that this was different. This wasn't the same as before. This wasn't a dinner where I would be shoved to the side or ignored. This was a chance to rebuild something new, a new kind of relationship between us. I walked into their home and it was quiet, not the uncomfortable kind of quiet, but the kind that comes with understanding. Carl was setting the table and Ruby was on the couch flipping through a book. They both looked up when I entered, and for the first time in years they both smiled at me, not out of obligation but because they genuinely wanted me there. "Hey Mom," Carl said as he placed the last plate on the table. "We're having spaghetti tonight. I know it's not much, but it's what we had in the fridge." "It looks perfect," I replied, my voice light but full of warmth. I sat down at the table and for the first time in a long time I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Ruby spoke up, her voice a little shy but sincere. "Grandma, I wanted to show you something." She handed me a piece of paper. It was a drawing, a picture of a woman standing tall, looking strong and confident. It was me. I smiled, my heart swelling. Ruby had captured me, the real me, not the one I had always hidden away, but the woman who was finally choosing herself. "I love it, Ruby," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "It's beautiful." Carl looked at me, his eyes softening. "Mom, we never really appreciated you, not the way you deserved, but I'm going to change that. I'm going to do better." And as we sat there, eating spaghetti and talking about nothing and everything, I realized that this was what I had been waiting for all along, not for perfection, but for authenticity. Not for grand gestures, but for simple, honest moments where we could just be who we were without pretense or expectation. As the years passed, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Carl and I spoke more often. Ruby and I spent afternoons baking, reading, and laughing together. I found myself enjoying the little things, the quiet mornings with my tea, the evenings when the world slowed down, the moments when I could just be with myself and my thoughts. I kept traveling, I kept learning, I kept growing, and I knew that I wasn't just waiting for life to happen anymore. I was making it happen. I wasn't just waiting to be seen, I was letting myself be seen. And in that simple, quiet space, I realized that I had truly found peace, not in the forgiveness of others, but in the freedom of finally choosing myself.